The cold heart of success. Julian Blackwood stepped out of his sleek black Mercedes onto the bustling streets of downtown Seattle. At 34, he had everything most people could only dream of. His tech empire, Blackwood Industries, had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His custom-tailored suit cost more than most people earned in a month, and his Patek Philippe watch could buy a house. Yet as he walked toward the high-end restaurant where he was meeting potential investors, something felt hollow inside his chest. The autumn rain had just stopped, leaving the sidewalks glistening under the streetlights. Julian had always preferred the rain to sunshine. Sunshine felt too optimistic, too warm for someone who had built his fortune on cold logic and calculated risks. He believed emotions were weaknesses that successful people could not afford. His phone buzzed with another urgent message from his assistant about the Tokyo deal, but Julian ignored it. For once in his life, he wanted just 5 minutes without the constant pressure of business decisions that could make or break entire companies. Two small voices in the rain. As Julian turned the corner toward the restaurant, he heard something that made him pause. Two young voices were calling out desperately to passersby, their words barely audible above the city noise. "Please, mister. Please, lady. We really need help." Julian looked around and spotted them near a small coffee shop. Two identical girls, no more than 8 years old, sat on a worn blanket with a tiny orange kitten in a cardboard box. They wore matching purple jackets that looked too thin for the cold Seattle evening, and their sneakers had holes that let the dampness seep through. Most people walked past them without a second glance. Julian started to do the same, but something about their voices made him stop. These were not the voices of children asking for candy money or playing games. These voices carried a weight that children should never have to bear. "Sir? Sir? With the nice suit?" One of the girls called out as she noticed him watching. "Would you like to adopt our kitten? We're not asking for much money. Just whatever you think is fair." Julian approached them slowly, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the wet pavement. The twins looked up at him with identical pairs of bright green eyes that sparkled with unshed tears. They were beautiful children, with curly brown hair that caught the light from the street lamp. But their faces were etched with worry far beyond their years. "How much are you asking for the kitten?" Julian found himself saying, though he had never owned a pet in his life. "Whatever you can give us, sir," the girl on the left replied, her voice trembling. "We just really, really need some money tonight." The desperate truth. Julian knelt down to their level, its expensive suit touching the damp sidewalk. The kitten mewed softly from its box, a tiny ball of orange fur with sleepy eyes. "What are your names?" he asked gently. "I'm Emma," said the girl who had called to him. "And this is my twin sister, Grace. We're 8 years old, and this is Pumpkin." She pointed to the kitten. "Why are you out here so late selling a kitten?" Julian asked. "Where are your parents?" Emma and Grace exchanged a look that spoke of shared secrets and burdens too heavy for children. "Our big sister Rosalie is at home," Grace whispered. "She's really sick, and we need money for her medicine. She doesn't know we're here. She would be so mad if she knew." Julian felt something twist in his chest. "What kind of medicine does she need?" "The expensive kind," Emma said matter-of-factly. "The doctor said it costs $300. And Rosalie has been working 3 jobs, but she still doesn't have enough money. She's been getting sicker and sicker. And we heard her crying last night when she thought we were asleep. She won't ask anyone for help," Grace added. "She says we have to take care of ourselves because there's nobody else. But we thought maybe if we could get some money for Pumpkin, we could help her." Julian looked at the kitten, and back at the two girls whose love for their sister was written all over their faces. In his world of corporate boardrooms and million-dollar deals, he had forgotten that this kind of pure, selfless love even existed, a decision that changes everything without hesitation. Julian pulled out his wallet and counted out $500 in cash. The twins gasped as he placed the money in their small hands. "This is too much, sir," Emma protested. "Pumpkin is just a regular kitten." "It's exactly the right amount," Julian said firmly. "But I have one condition." The girls looked at him with wide eyes, clutching the money like a lifeline. "I want you to take me to meet your sister Rosalie," he continued. I want to make sure she's okay and that this money actually goes to her. Medicine. Emma and Grace looked at each other uncertainly. She won't like it, Grace warned. Rosalie doesn't like accepting help from strangers. She says it makes us weak. She's very proud, Emma added. Sometimes too proud. But she takes care of us better than anyone. She makes sure we have food and go to school and have clean clothes. Even when she's sick, Julian found himself curious about this woman who had earned such fierce loyalty from these two children. What happened to your parents? They died in a car accident 3 years ago, Grace said softly. Rosalie was only 23, but she became our legal guardian. She dropped out of college to take care of us. The weight of this information settled on Julian like a physical burden. A 23-year-old woman had sacrificed her future to raise her twin sisters. And now she was sacrificing her health to provide for them. Please take me to her, Julian said. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to help. The walk home, Emma carefully picked up Pumpkin while Grace folded their blanket. Julian offered to carry the kitten's box. The three of them began walking through the quieter residential streets of Seattle. The neighborhood grew more modest as they walked. The houses were smaller, older, and many had seen better days. But there was something warm about this area that Julian's expensive penthouse lacked. Flower boxes adorned windows, children's drawings were taped to doors, the smell of home-cooked dinners drifted from open windows. That's Mrs. Rodriguez's house. Emma pointed to a small blue house with a well-tended garden. She sometimes gives us vegetables from her garden when Rosalie is working late. And Mr. Thompson over there fixed our front door when it got stuck, Grace added, pointing to an elderly man watering his plants. Rosalie tried to pay him. He said neighbors help neighbors. Julian realized he didn't know the names of any of his neighbors. He lived in a building where people nodded politely in elevators, but never spoke. The idea of a community where people genuinely cared for each other was foreign to him. As they walked, the twins told him more about their sister. How she worked as a waitress at a diner during the day, cleaned office buildings at night, and painted portraits on weekends to earn extra money. How she helped them with homework even when she was exhausted. And how she always made sure they felt loved and safe despite their difficult circumstances. She's the best artist in the whole world, Emma said proudly. She can paint anything. Flowers, animals, people. She painted a picture of our mom and dad from memory, so we wouldn't forget what they looked like, but she stopped painting her own pictures, Grace added sadly. She says there's no time for dreams anymore, only responsibilities. Arriving at home, they stopped in front of a small apartment building that had clearly seen better decades. The brick was weathered, and some of the windows had cracks that were held together with tape. But the small front garden was carefully maintained, the colorful flowers that seemed to bloom despite the difficult conditions. We live on the second floor, Emma said, suddenly nervous. Apartment to be, Julian followed the twins up a narrow staircase that creaked with each step. The hallway smelled like cooking spices and cleaning supplies. It was a world away from his sterile modern penthouse, but somehow it felt more alive. Emma fumbled with her keys at apartment to be. From inside, Julian could hear soft music playing and the sound of someone moving around. Rosalie. Grace called softly as she opened the door. We're home, girls. Thank goodness you're back. I was starting to worry, came a voice from inside. Julian heard footsteps approaching the door, and then it opened fully to reveal the woman who had captured the complete devotion of two 8-year-old girls. Meeting Rosalie. Turner stood in the doorway wearing faded jeans and an oversized sweater that couldn't hide how thin she had become. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale with exhaustion. But her eyes, the same bright green as her sister's, held a strength that Julian immediately recognized and respected. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or professional makeup. Her beauty came from somewhere deeper, from the love that radiated from her every gesture toward her sisters and the fierce protectiveness in her stance. When Rosalie saw Julian standing behind the twins, those green eyes filled with alarm. Girls, who is this man? What's going on? Her voice carried both concern and authority. Emma and Grace looked at each other. suddenly realizing they were about to face their sister's anger. "Rosalie, we can explain." Grace started nervously. "We sold pumpkin," Emma added quickly. "But it was for a good reason." Rosalie's face went through several expressions rapidly. Confusion, concern, and then growing anger as she understood what had happened. "You sold our kitten?" she asked quietly, in the way that parents speak when they're trying very hard not to raise their voice. "To a complete stranger? Without asking me?" "But Rosalie, you need medicine," Grace burst out. "We heard you crying, and we know you don't have enough money, and we just wanted to help." Julian watched this exchange with fascination. He had never witnessed this kind of family dynamic before, where love and responsibility were so intertwined that children would make such sacrifices for an adult. "Sir, I'm very sorry," Rosalie said, turning to Julian with as much dignity as she could muster. "My sisters had no right to sell you anything. Please take your money back. And you can keep the kitten if you want him." "I'm not taking the money back," Julian said firmly. "Your sisters told me you need medicine and they were willing to sell their pet to help you. That kind of love deserves respect, not apologies." The confrontation, Rosalie's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Mr. Blackwood." "Julian Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood, we don't accept charity. My sisters shouldn't have put you in this position, and we certainly don't need your pity." "It's not charity," Julian replied calmly. "I bought a kitten. The fact that the money helps you is just a bonus." "We both know you didn't want a kitten," Rosalie shot back. "Look at you. Your suit probably costs more than I make in 6 months. Your shoes are worth more than my rent." You felt sorry for two little girls with a sad story. Julian was taken aback by her directness. In his world, people usually told him what they thought he wanted to hear. But Rosalie was looking at him with clear eyes that saw right through his expensive facade. "You're right," he admitted. "I don't want a kitten. I felt sorry for two little girls who loved their sister enough to sell their pet for her medicine. But that doesn't make the money less real or less needed." Emma and Grace watched this exchange like a tennis match, their heads turning back and forth between the two adults. "Girls, go wash your hands for dinner," Rosalie said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood and I need to finish this conversation." The twins reluctantly disappeared into the small apartment. But Julian could tell they were listening from around the corner. "The real truth look, Mr. Blackwood," Rosalie said, her voice softer now that the girls couldn't hear. "I appreciate what you did for Emma and Grace. I really do. But I can't take your money. We've been managing on our own for 3 years and will continue to manage." "Managing?" Julian looked at her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes. "You're sick, and you're working yourself to death trying to provide for 2 children. That's not managing, that's drowning slowly." Rosalie's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand. Those girls are my responsibility. I promised my parents before they died that I would always take care of them. I can't let them down." "You're not letting them down," Julian said gently. "But you're not helping them by refusing help when you need it. What happens to Emma and Grace if you collapse from exhaustion or get sicker because you can't afford treatment?" The question hit its mark. Rosalie looked away, and Julian could see the fear in her profile. "What kind of medicine do you need?" he asked. "It doesn't matter," Rosalie said stubbornly. "It matters to me." She looked at him with surprise, as if she couldn't understand why a stranger would care. "Antibiotics," she said finally. "I have a respiratory infection that won't clear up. The doctor says if I don't treat it properly, it could develop into pneumonia." Julian felt anger rise in his chest, but not at Rosalie. At a system where someone could work 3 jobs and still not afford basic medical care. "The prescription costs $300, he asked. Rosalie nodded. "I've been trying to save up, but every time I get close, something else comes up." Emma needed new shoes because hers had holes. Grace needed supplies for a school project. The rent went up $50. There's always something. A proposal Julian made, a decision that would change all of their lives, though none of them knew it yet. "I have a proposal," he said. Rosalie looked at him suspiciously. "I already told you, I don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's a job offer?" "A job offer?" Rosalie's eyebrows rose. I need someone to paint a portrait, Julian said, the lie coming easily. A formal portrait for my office. I've been looking for the right artist, and your sisters tell me you're talented, Mr. Blackwood. You don't even know if I can paint. So show me. Rosalie stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out his angle. Finally, she sighed and led him into the small living room. The apartment was tiny, but clean and organized. The furniture was old, but well cared for, and everywhere Julian looked, he saw evidence of a woman who was doing her best to make a home for her sisters. Children's artwork hung on the walls, and there were pictures of happier times when their parents were still alive. But what caught Julian's attention were the paintings. Even in the dim light of the small apartment, he could see that Emma and Grace hadn't exaggerated their sister's talent. There were landscapes that seemed to glow with inner light, portraits that captured not just physical features, but the essence of the person, and still lifes that made ordinary objects appear magical. These are incredible, he said, and meant it. Rosalie blushed. They're just practice pieces. I don't have time for serious painting anymore. This is serious painting, Julian corrected. You have real talent. Talent doesn't pay rent, Rosalie said bitterly. The agreement? Julian turned to face her fully. Paint my portrait. I'll pay you $1,000. $1,000 for one painting? Rosalie's voice was barely a whisper, plus the cost of materials and time. Call it $1,500 total. Rosalie sat down heavily on her worn couch. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Julian sat across from her, suddenly understanding something about himself that he had never recognized before. Because in 34 years of life, no one has ever loved me enough to sell their pet for my medicine. Your sisters did that for you tonight. That kind of love is rare and precious, and it deserves to be protected. Tears started to fall down Rosalie's cheeks, though she tried to wipe them away quickly. I'm not used to people wanting to help, she admitted. I'm not used to wanting to help people, Julian replied honestly. But your sisters changed something in me tonight. Let me do this. Not as charity, but as recognition of what you've sacrificed for them. Rosalie looked toward the kitchen where Emma and Grace were presumably washing dishes and definitely eavesdropping. If I say yes, she said slowly, it's purely business. A commission. You pay me to paint your portrait? Nothing more? Agreed, Julian said. And when the painting is finished, we go back to our separate lives. No contact, no friendship, no ongoing obligation. Julian felt an unexpected pang at this condition, but he nodded. If that's what you want, that's what I want, Rosalie said firmly, though something in her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure. As Julian left the apartment that night with a tiny orange kitten in his arms and the address where he should return the next week for his first portrait session, he realized that something fundamental had shifted inside him. For the first time in his adult life, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business, profit, or success. He was looking forward to seeing Rosalie Turner again, and that realization both thrilled and terrified him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The first portrait session arrived at Rosalie's apartment the following Saturday morning carrying a small bag of groceries and pumpkin in a travel carrier. He had spent the entire week thinking about the Turner family, something that both surprised and unsettled him. In his penthouse, surrounded by luxury, he kept remembering the warmth of their small apartment and the way Emma and Grace had looked at their sister with such pure love. Rosalie opened the door wearing paint-stained jeans and a simple white t-shirt. She had pulled her auburn hair back into a practical bun, but a few strands had escaped to frame her face. Even without makeup and in her work clothes, she took Julian's breath away. You came, she said, sounding surprised. Did you think I wouldn't? Julian asked. Rich people make promises to poor people all the time, Rosalie replied honestly. Most of them don't keep those promises once they get home to their comfortable lives. Julian felt the sting of her words because they held truth. How many times had he made casual promises to employees or business associates that he had forgotten by the next day? Is that pumpkin? Emma's voice called from inside the apartment. She and Grace appeared behind their sister, still in their pajamas. He missed you, Julian said, setting down the carrier. The twins immediately knelt beside it, cooing at the kitten, who purred loudly at seeing them again. "We missed him too," Grace said softly. "But we're glad he has a good home now, actually," Julian said. "I was hoping you girls might want to visit him sometimes. He gets lonely in my big apartment." Emma and Grace looked up at him with shining eyes, then turned to their sister with pleading expressions. "We'll see," Rosalie said diplomatically. "First, we need to get this portrait project started, setting up the studio," Rosalie had transformed a corner of their tiny living room into a makeshift art studio. An easel stood near the window, where the morning light was strongest, and she had arranged her paints and brushes on a small table covered with newspaper. The setup was modest, but organized, showing the careful efficiency of someone who had learned to make the most of limited space. "Where would you like me to sit?" Julian asked. "The chair by the window," Rosalie replied, gesturing to an old wooden chair she had positioned carefully. "The light is best there." As Julian settled into the chair, he became acutely aware of how Rosalie was studying his face with professional intensity. Her green eyes moved across his features, analyzing shadows and light, structure and character. No one had ever looked at him quite so intently, and he found it both uncomfortable and oddly intimate. "Try to relax," Rosalie said, beginning to sketch on her canvas. "You look like you're sitting for a mugshot." "I'm not used to sitting still," Julian admitted. "I'm usually moving, talking, making decisions." "What do you do for work?" Rosalie asked, her charcoal moving across the canvas in confident strokes. Julian hesitated. He hadn't told her about his wealth or his company, and somehow he wanted to keep it that way a little longer. "I work in technology, business development." It wasn't technically a lie, though it wasn't the complete truth either. "That sounds interesting," Rosalie said politely, though her tone suggested she wasn't really listening. She was absorbed in her work, lost in the creative process. Julian found himself fascinated by watching her paint. There was a grace to her movements, a confidence that he hadn't seen in her interactions with him. This was her element, her place of power and control. Interrupted by life, they had been working for about an hour when Grace appeared beside the easel, tugging on her sister's shirt. "Rosie, I don't feel good," she said quietly. Immediately, Rosalie set down her brush and knelt to Grace's level, pressing her hand against the child's forehead. "You have a fever, sweetheart," she said with concern. "Let's get you some medicine and back to bed." Julian watched as Rosalie's entire focus shifted to her sister. The portrait was forgotten as she guided Grace to the small bathroom, talking softly to her about how she was going to feel better soon. "Is Grace okay?" Emma asked, climbing onto the couch near Julian. "Your sister will take care of her," Julian said. "She seems very good at taking care of people. She's the best," Emma said loyally. "When I had chickenpox last year, Rosie sat with me every night until I felt better. She even missed work, and her boss was really mean about it." Julian felt another twist of emotion. "She missed work to take care of you?" "She always takes care of us first," Emma said matter-of-factly. "That's what families do." Julian realized that he had no experience with that kind of family loyalty. His own parents had been wealthy, but distant, more interested in their social obligations than in their son. When he had been sick as a child, nannies and housekeepers had cared for him while his parents continued their busy lives. Rosalie returned from the bathroom looking worried. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Grace has a fever of 102. I need to take her to the clinic. Can I help?" Julian found himself asking. Rosalie looked surprised. "You don't have to do that. This isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not, but I'd like to help anyway." The clinic visit, Julian insisted on driving them to the urgent care clinic in his Mercedes. Grace, wrapped in a blanket and still feverish, was amazed by the car's leather seats and quiet engine. Emma sat beside her sister, holding her hand and whispering reassurances. At the clinic, Julian watched as Rosalie handled the insurance paperwork and medical questions with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. But he also noticed how her hands shook slightly as she wrote, and how she kept checking and rechecking Grace's temperature. When the receptionist told them the copay would be $75, Julian saw Rosalie's face pale. She opened her wallet and counted the bills inside twice, clearly calculating whether she had enough. Without thinking, Julian stepped forward and handed his credit card to the receptionist. "I'll take care of it," he said quietly. "Mr. Blackwood, no," Rosalie protested. "I can pay my own family's medical bills." "I know you can," Julian said. "But you shouldn't have to choose between Grace's health and next week's groceries." Rosalie stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Anger, gratitude, and something else were all mixed together in her green eyes. In the waiting room, while they waited for Grace to be seen by a doctor, Emma entertained herself by drawing on the children's activity sheets the clinic provided. Grace dozed fitfully against her sister's shoulder. Julian found himself studying this small family with growing fascination. "You don't have to stay," Rosalie said quietly. "This could take hours." "I'm not going anywhere," Julian replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Why?" Rosalie asked. "You barely know us. This morning, you came to have your portrait painted, to spend your Saturday in a medical clinic with someone else's sick child." Julian considered her question seriously. Why was he here? Why did he care so much about these three people he had met only a week ago? "Because," he said finally, "watching you with your sisters has shown me something I never knew I was missing." "What's that?" "A real family. People who put each other first, who love without conditions or expectations." "I've never had that." Rosalie studied his face. "What about your family?" "Your parents?" "My parents loved me," Julian said carefully, "but they loved their lifestyle more. I was raised by nannies and sent to boarding schools. Family was something that happened during scheduled visits and holiday photo sessions." "That sounds lonely," Rosalie said softly. "I didn't know it was lonely until I met you three," Julian admitted. The doctor's diagnosis: Grace had strep throat, easily treatable with antibiotics. The prescription cost $40, which Julian paid before Rosalie could object. As they drove home, Grace was already feeling better thanks to the fever reducer the doctor had given her. "Thank you," Rosalie said quietly as Julian parked outside their apartment building. "For what?" "For staying. For helping. For not making me feel weak for accepting help." Julian turned to look at her. "You're not weak, Rosalie. You're the strongest person I've ever met." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Julian realized he was falling for this woman who had sacrificed everything for her sisters, and the realization terrified him. Growing closer over the next few weeks, Julian found reasons to visit the Turner apartment regularly. Sometimes it was for portrait sessions, sometimes to bring groceries or small gifts for the girls, and sometimes just because he couldn't stay away. He learned that Rosalie got up at 5 in the morning to work a shift at the diner before the girls woke up. He learned that she had been accepted to art school on a full scholarship, but had turned it down when her parents died. He learned that she read to Emma and Grace every night, no matter how tired she was, because their mother used to read to all three of them. In return, Rosalie learned that Julian had built his company from nothing, working 18-hour days for years. She learned that he had never taken a real vacation, never had a pet, never learned to cook anything more complicated than toast. She learned that behind his expensive clothes and confident demeanor was a man who had never learned how to truly connect with another person. "You know," Rosalie said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, "for a successful businessman, you're remarkably bad at using a dishwasher." Julian laughed, soap suds up to his elbows. "I've never actually used one before. I have a cleaning service." "Of course you do," Rosalie said, but she was smiling. "Here, let me show you." As she guided his hands to load the dishes correctly, Julian became hyper-aware of her closeness, the scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her skin. When she looked up at him, their faces were only inches apart. For a moment, Julian thought she might kiss him. For a moment, he hoped she would. But then Rosalie stepped back, the spell broken. "The portrait is almost finished," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "Is it?" Julian asked, disappointed. "Yes. Maybe 2 more sessions and it will be done." The implication hung between them. When the portrait was finished, their agreement would be complete. Julian would have no more reason to visit, and they would return to their separate worlds. The revelation: it was Emma who accidentally revealed Julian's true identity. They were playing a board game on the living room floor when she pointed to a business magazine on Rosalie's coffee table. "Hey, that man looks like Julian," she said excitedly. Rosalie and Julian both turned to look at the magazine. On the cover was a photo of Julian in an expensive suit, standing in front of his company's headquarters. The headline read, "Tech billionaire Julian Blackwood's latest innovation." The silence that followed was deafening. "Billionaire?" Rosalie whispered, staring at the magazine cover. Julian's heart sank. "Rosalie, I can explain." "Billionaire," she repeated, her voice rising. "You're not just some guy who works in technology. You're Julian Blackwood. I've heard of you. Everyone's heard of you." Emma and Grace looked between the adults, sensing tension they didn't understand. "Girls, go play in your room," Rosalie said firmly. "But we're in the middle of the game," Grace protested. "Now," Rosalie said in a tone that brooked no argument. When the twins had reluctantly disappeared into their bedroom, Rosalie turned to Julian with fire in her eyes. "How could you lie to me?" she demanded. "All this time, you've been pretending to be someone you're not." "I never lied," Julian said desperately. "I just didn't tell you everything. You let me think you were a regular person. You let me worry about whether I was charging you too much for the portrait when you probably spend more on lunch than I make in a month." Julian stood up, trying to approach her, but Rosalie backed away. "This whole thing has been a game to you, hasn't it?" she continued. "The poor little family, so quaint and charming. Did you tell your rich friends about us? About the charity case you were helping?" "It's not like that," Julian said, his own anger rising. "Nothing about this has been a game to me. Then why didn't you tell me who you really were?" Julian ran his hands through his hair, struggling to find the right words. "Because I liked who I was when I was with you," he said finally. "Not Julian Blackwood the billionaire, or Julian Blackwood the CEO. Just Julian, the man who was learning what it felt like to be part of a real family. But that's not who you are," Rosalie shouted. "You live in a completely different world. You have responsibilities and expectations and a lifestyle that has nothing to do with us." "My lifestyle is empty," Julian said desperately. "My responsibilities are meaningless. Everything. I thought matter doesn't matter at all compared to what I've found with you and the girls." Rosalie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand," she said. "People like you don't stay with people like us. You have fun playing house for a while, and then you go back to your real life, and we're left picking up the pieces." "That's not what this is," Julian insisted. "Isn't it?" Rosalie challenged. "When was the last time you went more than a day without checking your phone for business calls? When was the last time you turned down a meeting or a deal to spend time with us?" Julian opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. She was right. Even during his visits to their apartment, he had been distracted by calls and emails. He had stepped out to take important calls, promising to be right back. "I thought so," Rosalie said bitterly. "Your real world is calling, Mr. Blackwood. I think it's time for you to answer." "The demand I want you to leave," Rosalie said quietly. "Take your portrait and your money and go back to your billion-dollar life." "Rosalie, please," Julian begged. "Don't do this. What we have is real. What we have is an illusion," Rosalie replied. "I was stupid enough to think that maybe, just maybe, someone could actually care about us for who we are. But you've been lying from the beginning." "I do care about you," Julian said desperately. "I love you. I love all three of you." The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had spoken of love, and Julian realized he meant it completely. But instead of softening Rosalie's expression, his declaration seemed to make her angrier. "Love," she said. "You think this is love? Love is honest. Love doesn't lie about who it is. Love doesn't let someone fall for a person who doesn't really exist." Julian felt like she had slapped him. "I am real. My feelings for you are real. Your feelings for the idea of us might be real," Rosalie said. "But you don't love me, Julian. You love the way I make you feel about yourself. You love playing the hero, rescuing the poor, struggling family. It makes you feel good about your wealth and privilege. That's not true." Julian said, but even as he said it, He wondered if there was some truth in her accusation. "Prove it," Rosalie said. "Give up your company. Give up your money. Come live in this apartment and work 3 jobs to help me support Emma and Grace. See how much you love us then." Julian stared at her, realizing she was asking him to choose. His old life or this new one? His empire or their love? "You can't, can you?" Rosalie said, reading his expression. "Because when it comes down to it, you're not willing to sacrifice anything real for us. You want to have both worlds, but that's not how love works." Julian felt his world crashing down around him. Everything she was saying felt unfair, but he couldn't find the words to argue because part of him feared she might be right. "The portrait is on the easel," Rosalie said, walking to the door and opening it. "Take it and go. Don't come back." "What about Emma and Grace?" Julian asked desperately. "They care about me too. They'll get over it," Rosalie said, though her voice cracked slightly. "Children are resilient. They'll forget about you and move on with their real lives." Julian looked toward the bedroom where he could hear the twins talking quietly. He thought about all the conversations they'd had, all the games they'd played, all the times they had looked at him with trust and affection. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Rosalie said. "Please, just go." Julian walked to the easel and looked at the portrait Rosalie had painted of him. It was masterful work, capturing not just his physical appearance, but something deeper. In her painting, he looked like a man who had found something precious, something worth protecting. He looked like a man capable of love. But looking at Rosalie's tear-stained face, Julian realized he had failed to become that man when it mattered most. He picked up the portrait and walked toward the door, pausing next to Rosalie. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for lying, for hurting you, for not being the man you deserved." "So am I," Rosalie whispered. And with that, Julian walked out of the apartment and out of their lives, carrying with him a portrait that showed him who he could have been if he had been brave enough to choose love over everything. L's 6 months of emptiness. Julian stared out the floor-tesseling windows of his penthouse at the Seattle skyline below. 6 months had passed since he had walked out of Rosalie's apartment, and every day had felt like a year. The portrait she had painted of him hung on his office wall, constant reminder of the man he had briefly been and the family he had lost. His business was thriving. Blackwood Industries had just closed the biggest deal in company history, a merger that would make him even wealthier than before. The business magazines were calling him a genius, and investors were lining up to throw money at his next project. But Julian felt like he was dying inside. He couldn't eat without thinking about the dinners he had shared in that tiny apartment, watching Emma and Grace giggle over their homework while Rosalie hummed softly as she cooked. He couldn't sleep without remembering the sound of their voices, the warmth of their laughter, the feeling that he finally belonged somewhere. Pumpkin, now a full-grown orange cat, was his only companion in the enormous, sterile space. The cat seemed to sense Julian's sadness and would sit for hours on his lap, purring softly as if trying to comfort him. "What do you think, Pumpkin?" Julian asked one evening, scratching behind the cat's ears. "Do you miss them too?" Pumpkin meowed once, which Julian chose to interpret as a yes. Julian had tried to move on. He had gone on dates with beautiful, successful women who traveled in his social circles. He had thrown himself into work even more intensely than before. He had bought new cars, new art, new gadgets, thinking that maybe enough material possessions would fill the emptiness inside him. Nothing worked. A desperate plan 3 weeks later, Julian made a decision that his board of directors would have called insane. He called an emergency meeting with his top executives and announced that he was taking an indefinite leave of absence from the company. "Sir, you can't be serious," his vice president Robert Chen said with alarm. "The Tokyo project needs your direct oversight. The shareholders are expecting quarterly reports. You have meetings scheduled through the end of the year. Cancel them," Julian said simply. "All of them." Julian, his CFO, Patricia Williams, leaned forward. "What's going on? Are you having some kind of breakdown?" Julian almost laughed at the question. A breakdown? Perhaps, but it felt more like a breakthrough. "I'm going to try to win back the most important thing I've ever lost," he said. A business deal, Robert asked hopefully. A family, Julian replied. The room fell silent. His executives exchanged worried glances, clearly convinced their CEO had lost his mind. I'm putting the company in your capable hands for now, Julian continued. Robert, you'll act as interim CEO. Patricia, you'll handle all financial decisions. If you need me for anything truly urgent, you can reach me, but I won't be available for day-to-day operations. For how long? Patricia asked weakly. For as long as it takes, Julian said. Finding them again, Julian's first stop was the small apartment building where the Turners had lived. But when he knocked on the door of apartment to B, a stranger answered. The new tenant informed him that the previous family had moved out 3 months earlier. Leaving no forwarding address, panic set in. What if he couldn't find them? What if they had left Seattle entirely? Julian spent the next week searching. He visited every diner, every cleaning service, every art supply store in the city. He hired a private investigator. He even went to Emma and Grace's elementary school. But they had transferred to a different district. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the neighbor with the garden that Emma had mentioned, who finally gave him the information he desperately needed. Oh, you're the man who helped them, she said when Julian introduced himself and explained who he was looking for. Rosalie is such a sweet girl. It broke me heart when they had to move. Had to move? Julian asked with concern. The building was sold to developers, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. All the tenants had to relocate. Poor Rosalie was so stressed about finding a place they could afford. But I think things worked out for the best. What do you mean? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. She got a job at the community college teaching art classes. Not full-time, mind you, but enough that she could quit that awful night cleaning job. Last I heard, they found a little house to rent in the Greenwood neighborhood. Julian felt his heart race. Do you know the address? I'm afraid I don't, but you might try the Greenwood Community Center. Rosalie volunteers there on weekends, helping children with art projects. The community center. Julian arrived at the Greenwood Community Center on a Saturday morning, his heart pounding with hope and terror. Through the windows, he could see children gathered around tables, working on various art projects. And there, moving between the tables with patience and gentle encouragement, was Rosalie. She looked different than he remembered. Healthier, certainly. Her face had filled out, and the dark circles under her eyes were gone. She wore jeans and a colorful sweater covered in paint stains, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked like a woman who was no longer carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Julian watched as she knelt beside a little boy who was struggling with his painting, speaking to him softly and guiding his brush with gentle hands. The love and patience she showed with these children reminded him of how she had been with Emma and Grace. Emma and Grace. Julian's eyes searched the room until he found them at a table near the back. They had grown in the 6 months since he had seen them, their faces a little more mature, but their identical green eyes still bright with curiosity. They were helping younger children with their art projects, clearly following their sister's example of caring for others. Julian stood frozen outside the building, suddenly unsure of himself. What right did he have to walk back into their lives? What if they were happy without him? What if his return would only cause more pain? The confrontation before Julian could make a decision, Grace looked up and saw him through the window. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been joy. She tugged on Emma's sleeve and pointed toward the window. Emma looked up and immediately broke into a huge smile. Both girls jumped up from their table and ran toward the entrance, leaving their art projects behind. Julian. Emma shouted as she burst through the door. You came back? Before Julian could respond, both twins had thrown themselves into his arms, hugging him tightly. Julian felt tears spring to his eyes as he held them. Breathing in their familiar scent and feeling the warmth of their small bodies against his chest. We missed you so much, Grace whispered against his shoulder. Why did you go away for so long? Julian looked up to see Rosalie standing in the doorway, her face pale and her expression unreadable. Behind her, the other children and volunteers were staring curiously at the emotional reunion taking place in front of the building. Girls, come back inside, Rosalie said quietly. Mr. Blackwood was just leaving, no, Emma protested. He just got here. We want to show him our art projects. Please, can he stay? Grace added. Just for a little while? Julian could see the internal struggle playing out on Rosalie's face. She looked at her sister's hopeful expressions, then at Julian, then back at the twins. 5 minutes, she said finally. Then he needs to go, and you girls need to finish helping with the children's projects. Inside the center, Julian followed the twins back into the community center, hyper-aware of Rosalie walking stiffly beside them. The other volunteers and children watched with curiosity as Emma and Grace proudly showed Julian around the room, explaining each art station and introducing him to the younger children they were helping. This is where Rosie teaches painting, Emma said, leading him to a corner where easels were set up. She's the best teacher here. All the kids love her. She taught me how to paint flowers. A little girl named Sophie chimed in, holding up her artwork. Rosie says everyone can be an artist if they practice. Julian looked at the children's eager faces and then at Rosalie, who was trying to pretend she wasn't listening to the conversation. Your sister is a very good teacher, Julian said to Emma and Grace. She taught me things too. What did she teach you? Grace asked. Julian considered the question seriously. She taught me what it means to put family first. She taught me that love isn't about what you can buy for someone, but about showing up when they need you. She taught me that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold. Rosalie's hands stilled on the art supplies she was organizing. But then why did you leave? Emma asked with the blunt honesty of a child. Julian knelt down to their level. Because I was scared. I was scared that I wasn't good enough for your family, and instead of trying harder to be worthy of your love, I gave up. That was dumb, Grace said matter-of-factly. Yes, Julian agreed. It was very dumb. The private conversation, girls. Take Sophie and the other children outside for some fresh air, Rosalie said suddenly. Julian and I need to talk. Emma and Grace looked between the adults, clearly sensing tension, but they obediently gathered the other children and led them out to the center's small playground. When they were alone, Rosalie turned to face Julian fully, for the first time since he had arrived. What are you doing here, Julian? She asked, her voice tired. I came to apologize, Julian said. And to tell you that you were right about everything. Rosalie's eyebrows rose. I was right. I was playing a role when I was with you. I was pretending to be someone I thought you would like, instead of being honest about who I really was. I was treating your family like a project, something that made me feel good about myself rather than people I genuinely cared about. Rosalie leaned against one of the art tables, her arms crossed. And now I know the difference between loving the idea of someone and actually loving them. I spent 6 months trying to go back to my old life, trying to convince myself that what we had wasn't real. But it was real, Rosalie. At least my feelings were real. Your feelings, Rosalie repeated. What about your life? Your company. Your responsibilities? Julian took a deep breath. I took a leave of absence. I put other people in charge of the company. Rosalie's eyes widened. You what? I realize that none of it matters if I can't share it with people I love. All the money, all the success, all the recognition, it's meaningless without you and Emma and Grace. Julian, Rosalie said softly, you can't just abandon your entire life for us. That's not healthy for anyone. I'm not abandoning it, Julian said. I'm restructuring it. I'm putting the people I love first and figuring out how to build everything else around that. The real test, prove it, Rosalie said, echoing her challenge from 6 months earlier. How? Julian asked. Rosalie was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if she were painting another portrait of him. Emma needs surgery, she said finally. Julian's heart stopped. What? She has a hernia that the doctors have been monitoring for a year. It's gotten worse, and they say it needs to be repaired surgically. The operation isn't dangerous, but it's expensive. Even with the insurance for my teaching job, we're looking at about $8,000 in out-of-pocket costs. Julian immediately reached for his wallet. I can write you a check right now. No, Rosalie said firmly. That's not the test. Julian looked at her with confusion. The test is whether you'll help us figure out how to handle this as a family, not as a wealthy benefactor swooping in to solve our problems with money. Julian realized what she was asking. She wanted to know if he could be a partner, an equal member of their family, rather than the rich man who fixed their problems from the outside. "What do you need from me?" Julian asked. Rosalie looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, as someone who loves Emma and wants what's best for her, but who also respects that you're her guardian and the person who makes decisions about her care. What kind of support would be most helpful?" For the first time since he had arrived, Rosalie's expression softened. "I need someone to help me research the best doctors and hospitals," she said slowly. "I need someone to help me understand all the insurance paperwork and make sure Emma gets the best possible care. I need someone to be there during the surgery to help keep Grace calm and distracted. I can do all of that," Julian said immediately. "And I need someone who won't disappear when things get difficult or complicated," Rosalie continued. "Someone who will stick around for the follow-up appointments and the recovery period and all the boring, ordinary parts of family life that come after the crisis is over." Julian met her eyes directly. "I want all of it, Rosalie. The crises and the ordinary moments and everything in between. I want to be part of your family, not as a visitor or a benefactor, but as someone who belongs here." The decision. Rosalie walked to the window and looked out at Emma and Grace, who were pushing younger children on the swings and laughing at something one of them had said. "They missed you," she said quietly. "They asked about you for months. Emma drew pictures of you and Pumpkin. Grace kept asking when you were coming back.